Prashant Kumar, Vice President, Kotak Mahindra Bank, to take the center stage. Thank you.
I'm Senior Vice President, Kotak Mahindra Bank. I head the Western Division in KMBL. I look after Agri Finance Division here. Let me tell you something about Kotak first. We are one of the top 5 largest, among the top 5 largest private sector bank which we have. We have one of the highest capital adequacy ratio which is required to maintain and to run a bank in India. And our balance sheet size, gross balance sheet size, has crossed almost 1 lakh crore few days back. Okay. Now, I think this is a very interesting subject which we are all talking about, role of agribusiness professional in sustainable agriculture. So every time you think about sustainable agriculture, I think the focus, people tend to focus only on the agricultural aspect of it, whether on the input side or an output side. For me as a banker, when I look at it at a sustainable agriculture, for me it is more from a social well-being of the people who are involved in that business. Not exactly on the input side, on an output side, how this is there, number one. Number two, does it create an economic opportunity for everybody who is out there in that spectrum or in that field, trying to talk about it? Is it giving them enough economic opportunities to monetize those opportunities or to bring in cash or bring in EA? And are those efforts sufficient enough to alleviate poverty levels? Are they able to get out of that? And third, for me, from a sustainable agriculture, is that are we leaving it enough for our future generations? Or are we trying to gobble up all the resources which we have as of now, which we are using? Or do we gobble up? Or we leave something for them? So these three are actually the broad aspect which I as a banker would always look at it. Social well-being of the people, poverty alleviations and economic opportunity, and the third is whether you are doing agriculture in a way wherein future generations are going to benefit out of it. This is how, what it. Last week has been a very, like the minister was saying, the dollar is going 65, 67, 56, 58. So all of us are actually in our home thinking, oh, we are in recession, we are not in recession. One day dollar is 65, we are in recession. Yesterday dollar bounced back, the rupee bounced back 63, then 60. Are we out of recession? So I think this is a lot of pessimistic view on that thing. Dollar going up or appreciating dollar also gives you an opportunity to do a lot of exports. So you can't simply say that if the dollar is moving up from 56 to 65, a certain segment of industries like services or a software or an agriculture, so it's not that, the answers are not very simple, that if you keep it at 56 you will be more beneficial, or whether you keep it at 65 it will be less beneficial. So opportunities exist on both the sides. Now the problem is, while the prices or the dollar may go up as of now today, the export lag will happen within say 3 to 6 months. So you're not going to see the immediate impact of it on today basis. You're going to see it on an impact on a 3 to 6 months basis. So this debate always keeps on coming in everybody's mind, things have changed in that direction, or things are looking so bad. Is that thing so bad? Second thing which I've been traveling a lot, and I'm traveling a lot of within India itself. And what is amazing is that, India is actually gradually being segregated into what you call as a modern India and what you call as a rural or a Bharat India. And you can see it, And if you look at the census data of formation of town and villages, you'll be surprised to know a lot of these small gathering tier 2, tier 3 towns are getting evolved over a period of time. If you look at 1971 census, 1991 or 2011 census, you will see a lot of these conglomerations are getting formed. So people who were actually trying to migrate towards a larger city or a big city are actually now getting concentrated towards these small conglomeration of people, Aggregation is getting formed on the directions. Okay, and that's where the opportunities are actually coming in. All of those opportunities. Now, look at the investments. 75% of the all new industrial setup, any kind, is in rural India. If you look at statistics of Credit Suisse or CII data or anything, you'll be amazed to see that all of these industries are getting set up in rural India. Nobody wants to set up an industry in Bombay or in Ahmedabad or in Jaipur or in Delhi. You can't set up. The prices of lands are very high. So we are seeing a migration of industry more towards a rural India, rural setup. So rural economy, which prima facie earlier used to be driven only and only by agriculture, now you will see it being driven not only by agriculture, but also by industries, services, and a lot of other things, you know. Maharashtra is one very classic example, you know, the rural electrification drive which Maharashtra did, and it is changing the demographics. The penetrations of TV, the penetrations of mobile phones, the penetrations of your vehicles, everything is changing. So the whole point, the point which I am trying to make is that our assumption of that the rural India or an agriculture India is not growing or will not be able to grow, I think comes from the fact, like he's rightly pointed out, a lot of myths about that segment per se. The moment we wear coat and tie, we assume that the farmer is an illiterate. And every time we go and try to teach him something, and the best part is he and his generations have been doing this farming for the last thousands of years. So how can you discount that knowledge of thousands of years which is there with him? How can somebody like me come back from an industry with a knowledge of 5-10 years, I'm going to teach something to the people who have been doing farming for thousands of years? So their knowledge of their products, crops, diseases, that's something there. And like he rightly pointed out, their ability to change is much more faster than what we perceive is their ability to change. So a lot of perception issue on us, not on them. So those people are actually changing. They are changing very fast. But yes, the issue which is there is that land is getting fragmented very fast. That's a very big issue which is there, which is available at their level. As the generation pass, every 10 years or 20 years, the fragmentations of land are actually going up very high. Like the data which you were showing, these things are going high, and that's where putting a lot of pressure on that. Lot of pressure on everybody. How to increase our productions, how to make the farming more sustainable. Between 1921 census and 2011, our population has grown by almost 100 crore. The 1921 census done by Britishers, our population was 21 crores. And now, currently, we are sitting at a population of 120 crores. So you have to understand that. Now, to feed those 100 crores of people, you will require a lot of those non-arable lands to be converted into arable lands. Best farming practices needs to be done. You know, you will have issues of wherein certain people will say high pesticide, low pesticides. These debates will keep on coming in. Low farm mechanization, high farm. But I guess over a period of time, it is going to evolve. We are on a evolving stage wherein a lot of these things are getting evolved. You know, so there's going to be a little bit of conflict. People saying something, people not understanding something. But since these 100 crore people need to be fed, so agriculture becomes a key economic driver for that segment of people. Secondly, population-wise, if you look statistically wise, you look 60 to 70% of the people are still dependent directly or indirectly on agriculture. So you can't discount those facts, you know. And those are not indirectly. Those are not the people who own a land. There may be people who will be deriving benefits from the produce arising of that land. So every time you don't look at farmer as somebody who's a pure farmer and trying to do a farming practice or having a ownership of a land, but there can be people who derive benefits, who work on those lands. So this thing has been, you know, has been going on very well. And at the moment you say sustainable agriculture and like I said, these things. So how can you create infrastructure on the farm pre-input side or an output side? And how do you create a market? And that's where people like you who understand these businesses very well, your support, your help to the segment is more crucial and more critical. Wherein you can come back and you can tell, oh, this is a more innovative way of storing things. This is more innovative way of doing things. Oh, like he said that if you tell farmers that if you put a crop at a growing stage in nursery and you treat it somewhere down the line, you don't have to do expenditure on that side, number one. Number two, wherein people like you can go back and tell your farmers is that, oh, you have got small land holding. You can't be doing paddy and wheat. You need to shift. You need to shift to a different set of crops. And those shifting mechanism needs to be built in. And that's where people like you who understand those segments, who come from a farming background, though your role are more important on that. One more aspect which I wanted to look like, in the farming sectors, which I as a banker, I always, whenever see things, I feel very sad. There is an unequal distribution of profits between the grower and the person who's trying to market, while the end consumer may still pay the price, which is in line with that. But there is an absolute unequal sharing of profit. Now, two things always people come in, and can we eliminate middleman? Can we put in a lot of these big corporates? Now, it is a dichotomy as well. A big corporate will not buy a low quality product. Now, a middleman buys every quality product. You see? So, if a farmer grows a poor quality, he can still go to the middleman and dump and say, please value it and pay me. But if he grows a low quality product and goes to Walmart, will they buy? They will not buy. So you have to understand from that point of view also that a lot of corporates are also needed, a lot of these people are needed so that they can promote quality being pushed into these farmers so that they grow quality crops, as well as this middleman also needs to be told and subsequently be told that you cannot be taking a profit beyond a certain things. And if there is some extra profit, you have to find a mechanism to plow it back to the farmer from whom you have got those produces. And that's where when you go to field, when you do an industry visit or when you talk to farmer, you can work on some models. Can you work on some models wherein you can say if there is an abnormal profit in a particular segment, can you plow it back to the farmers? Is there any check mechanism can be built in? Some technology can be pushed into it so that the recordings can be done. This is what you have sold and this is what has been collected, so the averaging out can be done. Can those averages can be pushed back? So a lot of this is where I expect a lot of you people who are young graduates working there with great intelligent mind will come up with solutions and you will help us as a bankers to reach to them. Okay. Point number 3, which I wanted to make, every time we talk about farmers, actually we make it social. So everybody wants to talk about MFI institutions getting money, or a farmer getting money, or a bank should fund at 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%. Everybody has got its own notations of funding, pricing, and yeah. But tell me, why should we make it social? Why shouldn't he actually try to be competitive and buy a certain asset or a cash or a at a certain price? Like the minister was quoting example of Shirdi, that I was offering free meal, so I had a 30,000 beggar, now over a period of time we'll have 1 lakh beggars. So my view on things is that instead of being social, we should look at more from a well-being point of view. Are we able to deliver the prices which he want at a certain correct pricing? Are we able to help him to produce things what he wants to produce at a certain with the technology at a low cost and But the moment you say that it is more of a social objective, then he'll think of a farm loan waiver. He'll think of government deciding on pricing of commodities as and when he feels is correct. For example, cotton is one very classic example, 2 years back, the cotton prices reached 60,000 rupees a candy. And then suddenly it crashed to 28,000 rupees a candy. So when it reached 60,000 rupees a candy, everybody wanted the MSP of cotton to reach to a level of 6,000 rupees or 7,000 rupees people were quoting. Okay? From a current at 750 rupees for 20 kgs, which will approximately 3,500 to 4,000 rupees a quintal. Now current prices of cotton candy for last 1 year, if you look at how it has been moving, it has been moving from 28, 29, 30, 31, 40, now it is 45 today. So how do you price it correctly? In a scenario when there is excess crop, the price is going to fall. In a scenario when there is a surplus low production, it will fall. And remember, what is also happening, which I am seeing it, is that everything gets decided by a rainfall in Argentina, or a drought in Russia, or a drought in USA. You don't know how much time is the shipment time from a crop from USA to India. But the impact on prices are absolutely immediate. Can you get a soybean from USA tomorrow? You can't. Or can you export something? You can't. There's a time lag. But that's when you live in a globalized world, you'll have to actually take these factors also as well. Somebody will suddenly say, CBOT pe soybean ka prices ye ho gaya. CBOT is an American exchange dealing with global commodities, somewhere sitting in Chicago. What has got to do with a farmer sitting here in, say, Jabalpur? But he'll quote a prices from there. So you have to understand these things, you know. And remember, this problem will always keep on coming in. This problem is always going to keep on, because as more globalization is going to spread, such problems you are going to encounter. So that's where people like you can help frame policies, decide, design, you know, educate people around how to do it, how not to do it. That's where you people will be more relevant, you know, and that's where you are going to come into it. And I would love to see, you know, like you was pointing out, we have a huge and acute shortage of storage space. Absolute acute. I'd love to see many of you actually setting up these cold storages and warehouses as an entrepreneur and trying to run that business. That I think will be a good tribute to your organization or good tribute to your farming background. Okay, look, I have created a structure or a space, and you remember, Government of India gives a very handsome subsidy on that. So it's not that the Government of India is not recognizing the benefit, they're not trying to give you subsidy on that. But I would love to see a lot of you people coming together and you trying to form, you know, such of these things and trying to be an entrepreneur on your own. Okay, I'll set up a warehouse in my village. Can I help those farmers according to that? That's where you people will be more critical. And remember, it's not all about money. The resources can still be managed. There, like you have an option of bank finance, you have got a subsidy. So it's not that you're going to put in a lot of your own capital. And you can't recover your capital even if you put. Those are profitable ventures. So you can go ahead and do that. So I'll love to see a lot of you people working into that, number one. Number two, also something which I would love to see all of your work is that, can you ask people having small land holding to collate themselves and do a group or a community farming? Can you work on that? Can you push that whenever you go to your field visit, farm visit? Can you create those structures? Like I think NABARD also helps a lot on creating SHGs, JLGs, those structures they create. But can you influence people in your villages back when you go back to the places where you come? Okay, you have got a small land holding. Why don't you let us do by group farming? It will be cheaper. Resources can be shared. Cost per this will come down, and you will be more profitable. Remember, in Pune, you had an example of Magarpatta city on that lines. Somebody thought about it. I'll not let farmers sell the land. I'll create a Magarpatta city where everything will be on lease. I'll help them get a finance, and the dividend of that income over a period of time is going to remain back with the farmers. Somebody thought about it and did it. That he did it in a real estate structure, but can you do it on an agricultural sector? When you go back, can you collect farmers? Can you create a self-help group? Can you create a JLG or any other structure where people can come, work together, do some hours of community farming and go back to their respective jobs. Not necessarily that everybody needs to work there. That's one area which also I would love if you can, as a agri professionals, you can work on that. Now, Indian banking, we have a huge technology issues in terms of delivering. The challenge which I face always is that how do you reach to that last mile guy? How do you deliver a cash at his doorstep, collect money from his doorstep? You find it extremely difficult to verify who has done those transactions. To get a cash and to deliver a cash. Now, giving money is always an easier way of saying that. The challenge we all banker face is that how do you go ahead, create reach point and collect those money back. If I am not able to collect it, next time I will not be able to give it. So those infrastructures or those technology things also needs to be created. So if you are engineers, you can work on apps, you can work on phone apps, create a mechanism wherein you can disseminate information on farmers, we can work on biometrics over phone. So collection, debiting, crediting mechanism, much easier. How do you create those touch points? Possible. So you need to just, that's why people like you, brilliant people like you, I'm old, so I may not be able to work on those directions. So people like you are much younger, you can think through it. And I think that gives us an opportunity to reduce wastages, create a system wherein things can be delivered to him without a middleman. A market can be linked, updates can be given, pricing can be told, storage pages can be told, hedging on exchanges can be built. A lot of these things can be done. The problem is, how do you make those people realize this is an opportunity, an avenue? You come, interact with industry, talk, how much you are aware, the content has to be more local, dialect, authentication, verification, knowing your customers' perceptions. These are the issues which I'll request if you can work out, think something around. And the banks will be more than interested, more than willing to come and work with you and partner with you. Because for me also, the objective is to how to make sure that the money is reached to the last man, so that he benefits from that. The moment he benefits, everybody else in the chain will also have a spiraling effect. Everything else will benefit. Everything else will benefit. Whether it is FMCG, whether it is YA, and the moment he benefits and every sector benefits, people are going to pump in money. It's not only the bank, it's the sectors. FMCG sectors are going to pump in money. It's the automobile industries are going to pump in money into that area, into that catchment area. And suddenly the demographics of that area is going to change. Just merely by giving a bank fund, it doesn't get. So you have to create that sustainable ecosystem where I said that sustainable well-being of that people. And that's where people like you can partner with a bank or a FMCG company or a seed company or an automobile company or a tractor company, anything you can partner. And then you can actually change. You can change the demographics, you can change the way people operate or people into that. Okay? Thanks. You have any questions, you can ask me. Yeah, tell me. Yeah, Mukesh.
So how a private sector bank can do that work and can help in financial inclusion, and about particularly of your bank, how this work is being carried out?
I'll put it this way. Financial inclusions, there are two ways to do it, One is that as a banker, I set up my brick and mortar model at every places where I go and open my branches, which our estimation is that is a more costly affair. So we are trying to work on a stripped down branches. So we are trying to experiment in around Nasik. In Nasik and its adjoining district, we are trying to put up 30 branches in that area. 30 to 40 branches we are trying to put up in villages with a population less than 2,000. We are trying to work in economics where we are trying to see whether it is possible. So we are trying to experiment that. Can we put up a branch, stripped down, low cost branch model wherein one man, one a maker and a checker can be placed, and then he can run it. So we are trying to see, number one. Number two, which we are also trying to see, can we look at mobile banking as an option from a bank point of view, or can we look at operating bank branches on alternate days? It depends upon how much volume people are willing to come or we are going to transact. Not only you'll be to arrive at a data whether people are coming daily, not daily, or transactions in the villages are 10, 100, few hundreds, cash delivery, deposits. So we are trying to work on. So we are in that learning phase, number one. Number two, we are also working with Fino. We are also trying to set up a lot of our business correspondent, and those people are getting appointed. And we have taken districts of Mehsana, we have taken district of Rajkot, we have taken district of Coimbatore, Salem, and districts in Jodhpur. So we are also trying to carpet bomb an area and see if we can go ahead and open a lot of these people's accounts. The challenge which as a banker, which always I always find and I always feel is that how do you keep your communication live? Our estimates on that, every time you go and open an account or the people, they don't come back and transact more often than that. So our estimates say that over a period of 2 years' time, they generally become dormant. From an active status wherein I open them, for a period of 2 years' time, they move to a dormant status. They don't have balances, they don't keep income into it. But we have been trying very aggressively to carpet bomb an area and get everybody into that. Now with Aadhaar card coming in, I think things will be much more easier for us as a banker also to have much more relevant KYC documents, identification of correct customers, identification of transactions, and yeah. Now, there have been instances, I can quote you some instances, there have been instances wherein an account is opened for a wife name and the husband comes to a bank with his debit card, with her debit card, and wants to transact. So those challenges are also there at a rural level. You have to understand that you open a wife's name, she has a balance, her husband will force her, and then you don't know whether you should allow a transaction, not allow a transaction. So those challenges are also there. But yes, we have been doing a lot of these things, so let us see. We should be able to do a lot of these, to acquire a lot of these customers on that front. Yeah. Yeah.
It has been said that there has always been a challenge to lend for a first generation MSME and very small and medium enterprises. If a bank would establish its own it would not be a consultancy, but a group of people like agribusiness professionals who can have eye on that, who have lended, banks have lended, so that their business will not go in loss and banks will also not be much risk. So is it economically viable?
Yeah, it's viable, and we do it. I don't know how much of you have read about this, the SIDBI scheme known as Credit Guarantee Schemes. That is a collateral-free lending scheme, run by SIDBI in collaboration with Government of India. Under that scheme, if you come to a bank and you ask for a loan or under that scheme, banks are obliged to pay you. And there's nothing collateral but a guarantee.
But does your bank help them to grow their business?
Yeah. Now, you see, when you say grow a business, are you talking about my finances? Yes, I help them with finances. But can I help them with the entrepreneurship skill? I can only train them. I can help you train. I can help you take to the people who are there in the industry and I meet you. This is how the business is being done. So we do that way also. Yeah. Yeah, Viren. We have a priority sector targets. Priority sector targets, the licensing norm which any other private sector bank is that 40% of all your assets adjusted net bank credit has to be on the priority sector lending. 13.5% has to be in direct agri, 4.5% has to be in indirect agri, 22% has to be in OPSL, and 10% has to be on the weaker section. So effectively, now while the weaker sections can be double counted, but a client can be an indirect client as well as a weaker section client. So effectively 40% of your assets are only and only for the priority sector lending. So you can imagine a bank like mine, which has a NBC, last NBC of 60,000, 50 to 60,000 crore, 10% of it. So we are talking about 6,000 crore to be given to weaker section people. So overall, if you add across banking sectors, across year, so the amount is very huge. Very huge. It runs into few thousands crores to be delivered and distributed to these weaker section people. But the ticket size is 50,000, 25,000, lakh segments. We're talking about those loans.